live anyway. People in the virtual room knows what's happening.
Am I lit up enough? I look kind of dark, huh?
All right, if anyone gets Facebook notifications that's in the virtual group, did anyone get a notification? There we are, we're streaming live. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Dyer Literary Series virtual version, and I am very, very pleased to and excited to hear my poet feature, Amy King. And one thing I love about this is I do not need to do intros because I can just go on Amy's website and there's some really great stuff about her work, what she has done. Amy is definitely a champion to a lot of really powerful movements, and I admire that about her. And as she's mentioned before, she's got no filter, which I believe if you're going to advocate for something, I believe that helps 100%. And if everyone wants to read along at home, make sure you read fast. She was one of the original folks on Vita. And if you know about Vita and you want to ask Amy a question about it, put it in the Q&A. Vita is such a powerful organization. Just to fill you in briefly, Vita main cause is to get equal ground for women in the publishing world, and which is a great cause to have. And without further ado, I am honored and excited to hear Amy King.
Thank you, Timothy. I don't know how long I'm supposed to read for, so I just have a bunch of poems. Just let me know.
10 minutes, then Q&A.
All right. So I just thank you all for joining the reading. I just typed up a bunch of new stuff, so it's going to be a little weird, but I like weird, and I think people are fans of it too. Become the God you choose. My boyfriend is showing me the inside of his head, trying to get a little candle into the crevices to see what lurked in what darkness. We couldn't move past the paralyzed legs of his boyhood until we crawled over the words of his father, the dead things, beating him for not growing up, for not becoming a real man. Postscript. I do not know how any of this happened since I am gay and not yet a man. If this is freedom, we need a better word. I used to be desperate for love. I wrote poems and letters to no one and hoped someone would come, like in that movie, If You Build It, They Will Come. I bent down and licked the sun's rays. How I imagine death contains itself, but in you. Death's curtains with no name, the fluttering like a film I laughed with and cried to 10 years on, that recedes so deeply, I can barely see the plot or hear the people from the velvet coal dust lapping against the shores. Mud on blood on a glass door. I look in for you. Y'all are getting brand new stuff. I hope you like it. Everyone has age upon them. I already see a couple edits, by the way. Everyone has age upon them. How country I went that year I moved to the Catskill Mountains, as if Appalachia in my roots was a stone's throw from New York City. I know we only have these bodies for just a little while, and the distance from me growing up with Loretta Lynn's Coal Miner's Daughter and my yeehaw alone on a hill I call my own is also a stone's throw from shorter legs and the length of my shins now. They do not eat grits here much, and the ones I did eat were cheap mushed between what I now call poor people's teeth, the color of my own, a dividing line between time and New York City aesthetics, which gives small comfort, When hipsters up for a visit think their street cred and tats rate more than the years between my Georgia to Williamsburg time. No better than their own, now local, cemeteries with solar lights, indifferent to theirs these days. That was a little choppy, but you might get the sentiment. I grew up in Georgia, but I moved to Williamsburg in 97, and now I live up in the Catskill Mountains, though I still teach down there. And we get a lot of hipsters up here visiting who are very full of themselves. Female erogenous zone. This is very choppy. I am writing this in the nude from my bed, and if you don't believe me, take this picture from my memory, walk with it. Life can be forced rape, but life is better borne by women turned on macro to micro. All wars are fought to kill the female. At the heart, look deep. The taking of land is ownership of bodies, of that which sustains, nourishes. Slavery is on the spectrum of subservience via emasculation, subservience in the mutilated body, control of the means of production, the naming and denying of autonomy, the lash and paycheck by everlasting paycheck, masculinity asserted and masculinity provoked. Can y'all hear me okay? Great. I see a lot of thumbs up. That's nice. Everybody's mute. Kind of weird. I've done this like 6 times already, but it's still weird. Virtual snaps. The way the words romance you. The bones a bitter almond, the wind a gnashing cashew at the throat's thorax. If I can't seduce your body, I'll fuck my way to your brain. If unsure, ask me why my skull is still breathing and my lips are on your thighs. I did not map your lingua franca to your torso by accident. In a previous life, I was dismissed for the injury of asking a boring question. Unsure if my sin was the injury of asking or not announcing I would like for you to have your way with me, as if that was boring too. There really is something to learning how romance is a difficult netting, requiring a wide cast with pinprick precision, rather than broadly speaking, spun poorly, which attracts nothing at first blush. A better way of saying is singing is dying, as is humming out, which means we're all deaf all the time, until the sound beats itself out. A sunset, any sunset, is as gentle as the mustache on the woman you love going down. That was a kind of gay reference. Is that you broadly smiling, Timothy? That's nice. Please punch these flowers instead of my throat, is what the rose says. Please tear up these mums, is what the daffodils tell. When women concentrated on gardens, it was so men would be fooled into forgetting childbearing and the heavy labor of fact that men cannot carry the pain women accept as point of fact is lifehood and all that it requires. In other words, they said, here is a sunflower for all the things you cannot make yourselves. See how the light captures and releases seeds, nourishment, and new flowers, taller than the last. Hit me, I'm taller than you and older than the minutes it takes you to undo yourselves. Would it be rude of me to say, I like the length of your body since I've never leaned into it, the look of your clavicle without having traced it, to say I want to find the places on your terrain without hands in which you reverberate through me. Instead, I'll say I like the way your hair is growing and leave the subtlety of question to shape the intimacy of air in the space between us. How amplified is like the papers and stuff like that? Not too loud. This woman hits home after Leonora Carrington, who's a painter I admire very much. I'm full of myself, having filled myself this afternoon on her hyenas, her obsidian charges, her zebras in dresses on hind legs at tea. What is it like to be a painter, a lady painter, an oxymoron who paints from the freedom Mexico has given in her escape from the gilded poshness old England albatrosses her neck in? She surrounds herself with women, the female dressed down by men, that in her pigmented prowess is a dog in the night to be put down, despite the pharmacon's poison into antidote unveiled. Boys aren't trained to see the open windows she presents in vision, Shiva's chaos, held together by her strokes, that could be constructive if he would only give over a little into love and connection without resistance. In 8 minutes. This is a weird poem called As. The poem as Locked Door. The poem as Spinning Top from 3 years old. The poem as Slide Down the Mountain when you're really at the chalet with wine and chalice. The poem as Slate Gray, Bald Gray, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. The poem is as Blueberry Frappe when you meant to become a debutante. The poem as tie-in for things desperate. The poem as silence before the coming out ball. The poem as men forgetting having been babies, because to do so is to be in complete vulnerability. The poem at the end of the line when no one answers but poets. And I'll read 2 more. Is that good? Let's see. I'll do a Jackson Pollock simulation and To Honor. A Jackson Pollock simulation. I know you like me, though you barely say it. How you look with soft eyes. You are the anvil on which I hammer out my selfhood. I want love to be the strangest metaphor. I am an anvil in waiting too. One of the most amazing facts. Every death is new. Pouring the blood from the cotton came, not in polite drips and drops, but in the size of a pool one imagines boys in locker rooms go to, unwilling, but also unafraid. The first dive. Until then, I am no one. After that, I remain unthinkable, even to myself. We're in the miracle now, but we've always been since God plays poker with us. The problem is we don't know we're playing. An autograph says, the things I've done with my body were just about being in my body finally, until she was the wormhole accessing the study of ontology, what it means to be. And I was all gravity and giving, signatures and signs. I was all in. And the last one I'll do is To Honor. This is on the occasion of Potter's Field, and those of you who have been paying attention during the pandemic will know that Potter's Field was recently reactivated to bury a lot of the unclaimed dead from the virus. To Honor. A vasectomy of men gathered on screen today made me think of Lorca's death, his bludgeoning by cop, his star hidden, scared of what's left once the filming ends. I push away the feelings upon recognition. There is no right way to feel at last. I am left with the tulips in my yard that forgot to press up and through since I failed to plant them. And this night is the one before I wake to merge with memories I've read of Lorca holding New York once in the cradle of his journal, in the cushion of his mind, in the kindness of his words, in displacement of the love he saw us through, including the men who fail everyone, reminders to remember the soil and the many who enter in. Thank you. Unless you want more.
No, what I just did is I unmuted everyone so they can give you a round of applause rather than thumbs up. And we have some questions, so I'm going to actually quickly go to gallery view to mute everybody. We got the questions in the chat there, and but I will moderate. So the first question we have has to do with so I have to scroll back. There's a lot of chat going on here. All right. So who are perhaps your found family, and that's in quotes, or early Oh, I can write like that, poets and or books.
Oh, that's a really broad question, Jojo. Who was perhaps your found family? I mean, pretty much my found family has been through my life, artists and writers and teachers and people I've met along the way because my own family has not been very supportive or good to me. And I say that without any like victim status. It just is what it is. So, yeah, I would say a lot of people who are inclined towards the arts and expressiveness and creativity, people who are generative. I mean, I can name some famous artists if you want, or famous writers. There are some touchstones. I often go back to John Ashbery, um, Cesar Vallejo. There are some living ones. I love Heather McHugh, who someone recently compared me to, and I was absolutely thrilled by. Actually, it was on a set. I do background work on a set, and the guy who knows her, who has actually hung out with her, said I reminded him of her. So I was, elated. And I'm Facebook friends with her, so we communicate once in a while. But I do it as a sort of, "Oh, hail, and Heather McHugh has written something to me. Oh my God," kind of thing. So we all have our heroes, and even when they are in communication with us, it can sometimes still be, you know,
We
yeah.
got a question about, well, first of all, there's a lot of people I can't mute. So folks that aren't, can folks mute themselves so like a dog doesn't run by or like somebody's family runs and calls you or there's a fire that you have to attend to? Do you like Carrington's writing?
I do. I have not immersed myself in it the way I have immersed myself in her paintings and there are some interviews that you can see online. I am fascinated by her as a person. I've read a lot of biographical stuff about her. Believe it or not, you really can find footage of her on Vimeo, a little bit on YouTube. There's a video, a DVD that's out about her that I taught a class on her once, and my students incredibly gathered the money together to buy it. It was like some ridiculous price on Amazon at the time, and they bought it and then made copies of it and sent me the original. It's called I think it's called like the Crohn's Flowers or something like that. It's on Amazon, but you can see footage of her in that, and she's just a fascinating person to me. And so yes, I've got some of her fiction, but I've just been mostly fascinated by her life and who she is. There's a filmmaker, Alejandro Jodorowsky, who's done like the Holy Mountain and stuff like you know him. He was told by his guru or whatever to go and spend a year with her or whatever, and he did, and he wrote about it in his journal. So of course I bought his journal just to read that part. That kind of thing. So yeah, I think she was an incredible person, and she's getting her due now, but it's typical, uh she there's actually an interview excerpt on Vimeo. You can see where she says somebody bought like one of her paintings for like $1.5 million, like a few years before she died, and she was just like, "Isn't that the way it goes?" Right before I die, I sell one of my painting, but her work is amazing and valued much higher now. So um, I'm not giving her just desserts, but yes, I love her work, and I think her writing is very good too. I have not immersed myself in it enough to speak on it though.
You have mentioned art often, and you have art within your poems. So this will be a two-part question. So how much are your poems, general percentage, influenced by other art forms? And do you produce any art besides your literary work?
I would say that it's sort of all very symbiotic for me, all connected. Um, I did one of those tests when I was younger. What kind of learner are you? And they tell you you're a visual or a conceptual or experiment or whatever, tangible, like you learn by practice or whatever. And I basically landed a third, a third, a third. So I've always done the visual art. My master's thesis at SUNY Buffalo under Bernstein and Susan Howe was actually a photography show with my poetry. combined. I actually hung it in a local cafe gallery. I still do photography. I'm actually working on a project right now that's a little Cindy Sherman-esque. It's sort of a quarantine thing that I sort of have started working on. So it's all connected to me, and I guess in a way it's a little New York school too, because if you know anything about the New York school, they all were very influenced by, they hung out with the local painters, and it's very common, I think, in Paris in the 20s or whatever. Picasso was rooming, when he was poor, he was rooming with a poet. One would sleep during the day and one would sleep at night, and the other would work during the day and the other one would work at night. So I think it's pretty typical for poets and painters and photographers to work sort of in tandem or together. And somehow for me that has manifested. I don't show my visual stuff so much, and I'm actually I just got a studio here recently, so I want to go back to oil painting. I've touched on that a little bit. I used to have a dark room. I've done a lot of photography. So it's all related to me. It manifests in the writing itself. Sometimes a little biographical sounding, and sometimes as a sort of ekphrastic venture, where the visual sort of manifests in the words, if that makes sense. If any of you know the Greek ekphrasis.
Now, tell us a little bit about, how would you describe your current style of poetry, and maybe tell us a little bit about the evolution toward that style.
That's the problem with my style, is I do a lot of different things in poetry. And so some people know my work and will recognize certain things, but I have such different styles. And so there's never just, that's a John Ashbery poem. There's never just an Amy King poem, I feel like, which actually is a negative in terms of the marketplace. People like to be able to say, that's an Ashbery poem, that's a Picasso. Picasso is now labeled in his different phases or whatever, but I just don't have just one kind. Like, I find myself writing really narrative, and sometimes it's like choppy philosophical, sometimes it's just, people don't like it when I do too experimental, but I love to play like that. I feel like it makes new things. And so I'm not marketable that way. I've always been sort of on the margins, I guess, because I've never had just one kind of aesthetic that I work through or whatever. And I'm okay with that. I've never aspired to, I'm going to be, for me, it's not about, recognition so much as I want to share my work and inspire people. And, if one part of my work speaks to you and another part doesn't, that's okay. We're in a very vast world. I like to watch lowbrow TV, and even Shakespeare wrote lowbrow work. I mean, Shakespeare was writing soap operas. Now it's highfalutin, but it wasn't then. He was not writing even in the language that was considered, I think you were supposed to write in Latin back then if you wanted to be recognized as like very literary and high art. And Shakespeare was like, fuck that, I'm going to write some fucking soap operas here, So I've never adhered to like, I must have one recognizable style, so that people will know this is an Amy King book or whatever, so.
I get these top secret questions messaged to me privately to ask to you. So the person asked to me that they've said that they have avoided poetry ever since learning that rhymes weren't all that cool in freshman honors English. Any advice on where to start in learning and how to know if my fragments are poems, as I feel more drawn to poetry? And she loved you reading. Thanks.
So the person likes rhymes and has been told that's not cool?
I believe the question is, initially, she thought rhymes were cool back then, and then that kind of shot her down. So now she wants to know where to go next. It seems like she knows that there are more ways to write, obviously. And so what to do? How can she tell what's a poem? When her fragments become poems?
Honestly, I think the thing to do is just to write what feels good and energizing to you. And I use that word energizing strongly because when you've written something that feels good, like you put that down and you go, that feels good. And then You know, there are so many venues for poetry these days. I think just shoot it out to a few different ones and see if there's an audience. And that doesn't mean you have to aspire to the big, fancy poetry magazines that are name recognition or whatever. I think for me, I have always been fine publishing in what's, not considered highbrow or whatever. And maybe, I mean, I started the Goodreads poetry group, go there, post some stuff there. People, you get an automatic audience. You can post it in a folder that's about just having somebody read it, and people will just say they like, if they like it. Or you can put it in a workshop folder and people can respond and give you critique. But there's always a readership for everyone. And if you feel right about it, I mean, I know that Sappho probably wrote, coherent long lines or whatever, but that's not what we have now. And people love Sappho's fragments. So try telling people who love Sappho's fragments, that's not real poetry, There's a niche for everyone. And it's just sort of about you finding your audience, I think. If you are writing what feels right and authentic to you, then keep going at it. Keep doing what feels authentic. And then my other piece of advice is find a few poets that you really love and emulate them, imitate them, and grow from them, because that's how you learn. Is you find somebody you love, and that's just the way. I mean, nobody writes in a vacuum. Everyone is inspired by someone. A lot of my poems are drawn from pop culture. Writing is writing. I can tell you I didn't read it, but I wrote a poem recently called A Fog Bow, which is a real thing. It's a rainbow that is in the fog. It looks like a gray rainbow. But in that poem, I imitate a speech by the young Pope in a HBO miniseries called The Young Pope. And the writer of that series, Paolo, what is his last name? It doesn't matter, but he's a well-known filmmaker in Italy. We don't know him so well here, but I found his writing in that miniseries to be incredibly compelling. The speeches that the young Pope makes, the cadence, the way the rhetorical devices he uses, and I didn't think about them that way when I first listened to them. I was just struck, and then they kind of filtered into my poems. So you can say I copied his style. That's fine. It's an amazingly wonderful, effective style. And people like that. I should have read it actually. People like that. So no one writes in a vacuum. Find a poet you like, a couple poets you like, emulate them, and keep going with what feels good to you and what you want to say.
A quick free association. What book of craft would you recommend for poetry?
I don't have one.
Okay.
I wish I did.
Somebody loved that you in your poem wrote a vasectomy of men, using vasectomy as a collective noun. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Let me see. I got to go through here.
That was in relation to like all the Trump guys on the stage, not the good ones, but the impotent men that are doing nothing.
How do you feel about how attitude affects poetry? And can attitude carry your style?
Well, there is the poetry business. So I think there are a lot of people who are who get traction not because they're amazing poets, but because they fit into a certain group, and they are, some of the writers of the group are very good, but maybe some of them are not, and they still get credit and traction because they're in the business of poetry. No, there's nepotism in any group in this culture. So.
Okay, very last question. Usually I like to end it with one of my questions. You champion a lot of groups and you're striving for equality among groups. How, as a society, what do we need to do to reach actual equality?
Well, I think that it's to be crass about it, which is something I've always had to do in my activism in the past, is to count. look at your syllabus, who you have on your reading roster, as a host for yourself, and ask, like, do I have, I mean, people hate it because you think back to affirmative action. Well, I should get the job but this is about making amends for lack of opportunity, lack of inheritance, lack of, and I say that in the literary world too. I mean, I think of Rita Dove when she did her anthology, and she got a lot of shit from different people because she included Black poets who weren't well known, and people were like, how is that person supposed to be in this American canon? They've never really been noted. And the answer is because the people who were editing all those years did not care about people of color. So I think the answer is to count people of color, women, people with disabilities. How many people do you have? It's as crass and as difficult as that, and it's about making room and space for people who have not been given room and space because of the dominant voices and the people who have controlled the editing and publishing and things like that. I'll just say, there's a lot of ways these things have been controlled that are also crass that we're countering. So I'll give you a brief example. There was a period of time where women dominated the British novel, the English novel. I think it was like the later 1800s or something, a sort of a 50-year period where women were writing what was considered sort of the popular novel, and what was that and whatever. And men saw an opportunity because women were writing these novels that were really getting steam and being sold and read. And one of the ways they very strategically and consciously and proactively took control of the literary field was to start, back then they had, now you just Google somebody and you look at their biography, but back then they had a book that was the biography of all the writers at the time. And the men started controlling that biography, and they denigrated women in those biographies. They made them into these sort of domestic things. And so they made a division between what you see even now, high literary art versus popular chick lit kind of thing. And so the women's novels started being lower tier, less paid, that kind of thing. And then the men's were the more esteemed literary works of art. And it's very quickly, you can read a sociologist named Gay Tuckman. She's written a book on this actually, but she calls it open field theory. She created a concept for it called open field, or maybe it's called it's called empty field theory, where she says that men see an opportunity, or the dominant group sees an opportunity to go in and sort of colonize a space and a medium or whatever, and control it. And they very quickly did that. And so, it happens. And so when I counter people who are like, well, counting numbers, that doesn't, that's not merit, that's not value, that's, and I'm like, well, that's how it worked to begin with, that people pushed away good art, good writing, in favor of the demographic they represented, which historically has been, or, in the whatever past couple centuries has been cis het straight white males or whatever. And so they very strategically did that. So that was crass too. So anyway, that's my answer to that, is to count and make sure your playlists, your syllabi, your reading lists, your as the host, your readers all hit a bunch of different demographics.
So usually we like to promote indie bookstores. So if someone were to purchase one of your books or any book, what is your favorite indie bookstore, Amy, that you can send people to when they can shop online? I Am Books in the North End is closed because of COVID. So just, word of warning, support these indies.
Well, I like small press distribution online, especially right now, because it's sort of the counter to Amazon, and the presses actually have to pay a fee to have their books listed there. So to support them is really good, because if you see a book on there, it's against Amazon, and the presses are making, having to pay to list their writers there. So SPD, small press distribution. Also, what's the one in Portland that always that really was supported its workers during the pandemic? Why can I not think of the name? Anyone?
Again, or
I'm sorry, Powell's, not Portland.
Powell's.
Powell's in Chicago, I think, is the one. So Powell's has always been very help. They really came through for their workers when people were laying their workers off. Powell's managed to keep them employed. So that's my answer: SPD and Powell's, and whoever is your local indie book dealer too. Obviously, your bookstore.
All right. Well, Amy, thank you very, very much. That was wonderful. Unmute everybody. Here for Amy King once more.
Thank you.
And now we're going to say goodbye. Oh, almost did it again. We're going to say goodbye to our Facebook friends that were watching, and we'll just keep this group in Zoom. So say goodbye to Facebook. Last time I did this, I closed the whole Zoom room and